It's great to welcome back to the program today Matt Gertz, who is a senior fellow at Media Matters and has been very closely watching this sort of Fox News to Trump administration pipeline that exists. We sometimes talk about feeder schools. What are the private high schools that send the most kids to Harvard, for example, or something like that? And there's something analogous, I think, to Trump's second term staffers and Fox News and right wing media in general. Give us a sense of sort of your view on it. Is it as simple as Trump watched TV and picked people he liked, or what was sort of going on behind the scenes as this second cabinet came together?
I think that really is a big part of it. I mean, Donald Trump is someone who watches Fox News fairly religiously,
Yep.
reportedly spending hours of his time each day, at the very least keeping it on in the background. And what he has learned from all that time spent watching Fox is who are the people on the network who he can trust to do whatever he tells them to do. Trump spent a lot of time during the campaign explaining that he thought that his big flaw in his first term was that he hadn't been able to pick the right people,
Right.
that the sort of mainstream Republican apparatus had provided most of his staff, and that he thought that they weren't personally loyal to him and kept him from doing some of the things that he wanted to do. Like running investigations into his various political enemies, or invoking posse comitatus and deploying the military in within the borders of the United States for
Right.
various reasons. He did face substantial pushback from high-ranking officials during that first term, and he knows that people on Fox News have spent years explaining to their viewers that he is always right, that his views are correct, and thus that he should have people around him who are primarily loyal to him personally. And that's what he's done in selecting people from that network. He's picked 23 high ranking members of his administration from the ranks of Fox News so far in this second term. And I think that number will continue to grow over the rest of his administration.
It certainly does seem as though those people understand that the currency is loyalty, right? I mean, to the degree that Trump wanted loyalty rather than qualifications or experience as the number one metric, it does seem to be working according to its own sort of terrifying internal logic.
I think that's right, and I think you can sort of see how this second administration is to some degree stocked by people who at Fox News more or less won power struggles against the people who were in office at that during that first term. So someone like Pete Hegseth, who's the defense secretary,
Yep.
his previous job, he got promoted from co-host on Fox News's weekend morning show. And in that role, he won a series of fights with the military brass and with Trump's appointees at the Department of Justice, at the Defense Department, over whether various U.S. military figures who had been accused or convicted of war crimes should get pardons or other forms of clemency. He won those fights, and now in the second term, he is in position to ensure that there are no fights, that Trump just gets what he wants without question. Janine Pirro, who is the new U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, which is where I live, so that's great. She is a longtime Fox News host and someone who had a series of standoffs with Jeff Sessions, Trump's first attorney general during his first administration, over whether or not the Justice Department should be investigating various Trump political enemies. And now she's just in the role where she has power to do that on her own, out of her own volition. It's always difficult to tell with these things whether the better response is to sort of laugh at how ridiculous it is that people who have spent their entire recent careers just blathering on the television are suddenly in positions of power. Should we laugh at that, or is it actually kind of frightening
Yeah.
that people who are on the record talking about these kinds of ideas are now in positions of power? I mean, I think it's sort of six of one, half a dozen of the other.
I want to talk a little bit about how right wing media has covered some of the main sort of themes so far of the Trump presidency. You know, for a very long time, the Republican orthodoxy around consumption was more stuff for everybody. Having more and buying more is good, and it's sort of celebrated for its own sake that just this is what we do, consumerism, etc. And then now, in the aftermath of Donald Trump starting to seed interviews with this idea that, listen, maybe for a little while you'll have two dolls that you can get instead of 30, and they're going to cost a little bit more, but that's going to be fine. Maybe we didn't need the $30, which is funny because that's exactly what people like me have been saying for a long time, but it ran completely counter to the Republican orthodoxy. And also, I was saying it for sociocultural reasons rather than as an economic reality. But so now the right wing channels have to decide, are we going with that? Are we going with actually less stuff is good? Fewer cheap tchotchkes is better for us? What's been the reaction to Trump's lead on that issue?
Honestly, they're kind of all over the place, which I think reflects how the administration has been jumping back and forth between whether they're trying to use tariffs to vastly change the US economy or whether it's all sort of a gambit to get a negotiation that will get the Chinese to buy some more US soybeans.
Mm.
You know, I, my sense is that the major MAGA figures are just trying to get through the day. There is no plan. They don't have a sort of broad, most of them don't have like a broad scale ideological view of what is happening. They're not really trying to maintain some sort of consistent position. They're just trying to praise whatever Donald Trump is doing at any given time and just sort of get through their show. And then, you know, when Trump says something completely different the next day, you know, run it back and do the same thing over and over again. But they've been all over the place. They have to because, you know, they're propagandists, they're shills, they're just agreeing with whatever the leader says at any given time. And when the policy keeps bouncing back and forth, you know, there's not much else they can do. There are some people who've been pretty critical, though, of Donald Trump's position. Those are the ones that I think, as you say, are more associated with kind of the long time, more conservative economic position. So people like Ben Shapiro or the Wall Street Journal editorial board who have, you know, their own ideological views outside of whatever Donald Trump says at any given time, have been pushing back on these tariff ideas. And, you know, I think the end stage is probably Trump ceding more and more ground on those tariffs, and so sort of moving on from there.
When it comes to the Qatari jet, it is certainly the case that there was a lot of bashing of the Bidens for corruption when Joe Biden was president, and the evidence was just out of reach. It was either James Comer who was about to have it, or some guy named Tony Bobulinski was about to put the final, you know, nail in the coffin. Anyway, it never came. But now we certainly seem to be getting the impression that a lot of Republicans are not comfortable with the $400 million plane being gifted, but they're kind of playing coy with, well, it's being given to the Department of Defense. It's not given to Trump, but later it'll go to Trump's Presidential Library Foundation or whatever. What's been the reaction, bigger picture, on the jet?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the segment of the right wing media that's more Trump focused, the kind of MAGA loyalists, have been trying to avoid talking about this as much as possible because there aren't really good explanations that they can run with on this. I I mean, it just seems on its face like a ridiculous act of corruption, which I think is pretty obviously what it is. On Fox and Friends, the day after the story broke, they basically didn't talk about it except for a couple of brief segments. In one of them, the one of the co-hosts, Brian Kilmeade, actually asked the correspondent who was reporting on this, "Is this legal? Are they allowed to do this?" And the correspondent responded basically saying, like, well, this isn't the first time that one government has given an airplane to another before going on and talking about how FDR had gifted three airplanes to the Saudis in the 1940s to help them get the Saudi Airlines up and running, which, I mean, first of all, that's like 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And second of all, it's a really terrible analogy because it's not, airplanes for the personal use of the individual rulers, but for the use of the airline. And also, like, we're a democratic government that has a very specific line in the Constitution that says U.S. officials cannot receive gifts from foreign governments. Like, you're not allowed to do that. But for Fox, that was kind of enough. There was one other brief mention where Brian Kilmeade basically asked the White House press secretary to confirm what was going on, and then said, like, should people be like worried at all that the Qataris want something?
He said, no, no.
She's like, no, because, like, obviously Donald Trump would never do such a thing. So,
Right.
and they know that. And then he asked her about how her Mother's Day was, and they kind of moved on. So, I think it's been a lot of radio silence on the right. When they bring it up at all, it's to kind of push it away as much as they can. And then you have a segment of the right-wing press that's, again, like, less Trump-centric. People like Shapiro, people like the writers at National Review,
Yeah.
who are saying, like, this is obviously corrupt. Like, why would he do this? This is insane. I think it's a signal that this plane story isn't going anywhere, that it's obviously corrupt, that people can tell on its face. You don't need you don't need to explain what's going on here. Like, people can understand, like, the president is getting a plane from a foreign government.
Right. It's a
Very
simple one.
straightforward. I mean, you mentioned Hunter Biden, and that's, we saw Fox spending so much time trying to explain how the president's son's business interests were at all relevant. And in this case, it's the president himself getting a gift from a foreign government that is, something like 50 times more than the amount of money that Hunter Biden is alleged to have received from foreign governments. It's much more direct. It's much easier for people to understand. And the right knows that this is trouble for Donald Trump, but doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what the staying power is of the plane story, for sure. We've been speaking with Matt Gertz, who is a senior fellow at Media Matters. Matt, always appreciate your time and insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.